Clara and Adam moved into a forest. Her messenger had told her to come here, though as to why, they didn't know. She wasn't the type to doubt such instructions, though Adam wasn't too sure. Hidden away, they were being watched. A man knelt in the trees and observed the two travelers in his domain. There, the ranger thought about what to do with the two trespassers. Welcome to Mythical Phylogeny Adventures. I'm your guide, Jason. Today, we are looking over the Ranger, a class which is found in most fantasy series. For many of you, when you think Ranger, you are probably thinking about Aragorn, son of Arathorn, heir of Isildur from Lord of the Rings. He was the baseline used for much of the Ranger class we see in modern fantasy. But how close is he to the original concept? Better question is, what is the original concept of the Ranger? Well, a Ranger is described as a gamekeeper, wood ward, or sworn official, someone who is assigned to a forest or land to protect the vert and venison. You may also see them called foresters. These were officials charged by the crown to protect the land. But what does that mean? I've touched on it in a few videos, but forests are like gardens and need tending. If left to grow wild, you can end up with diseased trees wiping it out, or thick underbrush and leaves drying out and providing fuel for a forest fire. Yet, in medieval times, the job of a ranger mostly focused on finding criminals hiding in the forest, stopping poaching. Mind you, this was to ensure that when the king went hunting, that there would be game. And also managing the resources in the forest, such as lumber. This was a position comparable to a sheriff, so held a fair bit of authority. They were usually provided with a lodge which they lived in. How does that compare to the fantasy idea? Well, in a fantasy series, the ranger isn't a government job. They are those that live in the wilds, better associating with beasts than man, experts in wilderness survival. They practice trapping and hunting techniques, often seen tracking prey, veterans in the use of a bow and stealth. In many ways, they sound more like the mountain men from the American frontier days. Often they are shown with an animal companion, a beast which they have tamed and will travel or fight alongside them. So there is a fair bit of difference, I would say. The historical one is definitely lawful. You could justify good, neutral, or evil. As to the more fantasy-based, they can cover a much wider range of alignments without issues. So based on the historical context, what equipment should they really have? Let's start with armor. They patrol the woods. That would be difficult to do in plate armor. Thus leather, gambeson, or maybe chainmail would make sense. They are mobile, which means traveling light may be better. Weapons are a bit more straightforward. They operate in forests, dense trees, and climbing over rocks. A bow and arrow would aid in their operations, striking from distances or while hiding in the foliage, like a predator stalking its prey. This would be perfect for combating criminals lurking in the woods. It would also work while hunting dangerous beasts in there too. But there is a question. Often, they are using special arrows with unique properties, like fire, ice, lightning, and poison. Then ones like teleport, silence, and bouncing. Are those feasible? Well, poison arrow is an instant yes. It would be so easy for someone in the woods to collect poison berries, mushrooms, or frogs to coat their weapons. You could light an arrow on fire, but it will lose some of its power and risk being blown out. Of course, you could coat your arrow in a substance with a low combustion rate. Ice, lightning, and the others are more complicated and would require a magical component most likely. But foes will close the gap, and they'll need to fight up close. An axe is actually my first thought. It would aid in chopping wood, clearing dead trees and thick underbrush. And it could work in a fight. Mind you, there is a difference in wood chopping axes and flesh chopping axes, so it might be a tad difficult. Yet they could carry a sword. Hunting knives are common tools for mountain men. They need it to gut animals, split wood, and rope. It can be used to remove hair for tanning hides. And what is a sword but a big knife? I doubt a great sword would work for their fine details, but an arming sword could. What about a shield? I know Aragorn uses one, but should they? A shield is a great defensive option. It is possible to move through a thicket with a shield, but it is much more difficult. And this is the big limitation for the ranger. They patrol, which takes much more mobility than others. So you would want to discard the extra weight. Thus, I would say it could be a special piece of equipment, only occasionally used. Something that they keep on their horse. And that brings up the next thing. Should they have animal companions? Historically, they would have horses, and perhaps practice falconry. Now, the latter takes a great deal of care and knowledge to maintain a healthy weight for a bird, but definitely possible, and would offer great advantages. A horse would provide improved mobility and speed, for moving through the forest and around the surrounding area, while a falcon offers scouting and surveillance. Now, other animals are more questionable. Wolves were domesticated before, so probably a companion. Bears are possible, but incredibly difficult. Same for most mammals. Spiders are not possible due to their limited cognition. Overall, they do seem very viable for a fantasy setting, which is probably why they have remained so popular. But what would their primary stats be? Most series give dexterity and agility, but D&D adds wisdom. Dexterity is good for a bow, and agility for moving and patrolling. Yet wisdom is a bit of an issue. They need to understand the ways of animals and plants, and how to track. Tracking is mostly observation and perception mixed with deductive reasoning. That sounds more like intelligence than wisdom, wouldn't you agree? They also would build lures and traps, which is more of an intelligence thing. Understanding where animals will be and what sort of traps would work. So, how would they realistically operate? In the city, they should naturally be at the disadvantage. But out in the wild, where most adventurers operate much better, they would be the party's forward scout. They'll take point, looking for signs of an ambush and the movement of monsters. Now, I'm betting most of you aren't trained trackers. And I'll be honest about the scene of Aragorn tracking the hobbits into Fangorn Forest in the Two Towers. It is actually impossible. The ground would be trampled by the riders of Rohan, making the movements of the much lighter hobbits impossible to read near the fire, but possible closer to the woods. And tracking is much slower. So, if a ranger is looking for tracks, it will slow down the party's speed, but keep them safe. And that is their major role in the party. The last thing you want is walking into a trap. That would definitely be bad. They may be useful in exploring ruins, but I would add in a rogue, an archaeologist to your party. In battle, they would wish to be ambushing along with a rogue. If they can set up a trap, they could help lure their foes into it. They'll want to start with arrows and only move into melee as a last resort. Outside of adventuring, they will be protecting the forest, whether government funded or just by living there. They could make a living by gathering pelts to sell as guides over rough terrain. As to what sort of guides that might be, possibly a hunting guide for wealthy nobles. They could also collect bounties for dangerous monsters and criminals. Now, it would be possible for a ranger to be charged by the king to oversee a forest. This would be a position for an experienced ranger with accomplishments. It may be a reward for a quest, or if they have shown faithful to the kingdom. Potentially, it could serve as a way to remove someone from the line of inheritance and prevent bloodshed in the royal family. Historically, rangers would oversee the resources of the woods. So, it should be the ranger's job to take care of logging operations, prescribed burrows, and hunting within the forest. Now, what kind of magic would they have? They are often shown speaking with animals. But is that a spell, or just learning a language? Now, magic to produce special arrows is a possibility. It would be a form of enchantment to modify the arrows. Any additional powers would probably originate from magic, such as plant growth or spike growth. Overall, the ranger could be a viable asset in a fantasy world, as an adventurer, or just someone living in the woods. Their skills would be of aid to farmers, soldiers, and nobles all around. The ranger sprang from the trees and landed before the two adventurers. He eyed their licenses on their chests. They were startled by his sudden appearance, yet his attention shifted elsewhere in the woods to what was stalking them. The ranger is a well-deserved class to be sure in a fantasy series, and there is a fair bit that you can do with it depending on how you take them. Thank you for watching, adventurers. Please return next time for Nue. Until then, I'll see you on the roads.